All right, so we're just going to cover a quick little bit of some of these particular uses of, identity. So one thing that I do notice, and this is really hard because everyone has their own way of how they want to be identified. Like in one of my classes, I had students who wanted to argue the use of the word African American versus Black. The problem with that is not everybody who is, African American goes by Black, and anyone who wants to go by the identity of Black doesn't like, the use of African American. And there's a lot of different reasons why anybody would choose either or, right? Some would argue that to say that you are, African American, it's like, well, how would I know I'm from, African American because I don't know my heritage because it was stolen from me, right? So there can be that argument. Or, I prefer to stand by, the word Black. To me, there's, power behind it and so forth. So everyone gets to choose however they choose to be identified as. And it is very, very important that we respect how anyone chooses. And if you don't know, you can ask. If you're having a conversation, be respectful and be like, how would you like to be identified as? When we're having this conversation, what's respectable to you? Because I want to make sure that, I understand where you're coming from. That's the biggest thing. So again, we've got all kinds of different ones. One of them, when we talk about, because we talk about Native Americans in our in this class, so the term Indian is used when referring to people from India as well as Native Americans, which is false. Okay, so India, Indians, Native Americans. Okay, so this is just how we are going to define it. Natives is one too. Please, if you ever feel that I am using that wrong, you prefer a different identification, please let me know. I take no offense in being corrected. That does not bother me. It's important though that we are not talking for other people. We are talking for ourselves. So again, forgive me where I come from if I'm identifying, you or something in a way where you're like, well, you can't really speak for me. I totally understand. I'm trying not to speak for people. I'm going by the research and the information that I have been given in the many, many years I've been doing this. So again, things change, people change, choosing to identify changes. And again, I respect it. Please let me know if I'm, behind the times. I totally understand. So I'm just going by, the information that I'm given on the regular. So keep me updated. I do not mind. Let's see. I just want to see if there's anything else. Just be mindful of, when someone's saying he, she, or they, the reason why this is so important is because, like, for me, I identify as she. If someone keeps coming up to me and go, excuse me, sir, excuse me, him, or whatever, at some point, after I've said many times I go by she, that they keep calling me he, to me, it's telling me, you're probably not listening, one, or two, you're not respecting the fact that that's what I choose, or vice versa. Say you are him, say I'm a him, and you keep calling me she. I'm like, I go by him. After a while, you're like, I think you're just trying to be a jerk at this point, right? So be mindful if, and if you don't know, they's always a pretty good balance. You can always check with the people you were talking to or with. That's very important. Oftentimes I use they because for me, it's actually a lot easier than assuming someone's identity, right? If I don't have the opportunity to have that conversation, it's very important that we just are general and respectful. Okay, so just be mindful of that because that's what you would want. You want someone to, address you how you want to be addressed because we're individuals. And again, literacy is understanding our experience and our critical thinking. And then if we're going to be composers, we really have to understand our identity and then the identity of others. So, anywho, just be mindful of that as we move forward. Again, when we talk about labels can be good and they can be bad, and that's the problem. Is it could be good or it could be bad, and it depends on who we're with when we're using said labels. So I would suggest as we're moving forward in life, be mindful of those around you. Remember, we talked about hate groups before and that we just want to be a part of, but sometimes we end up in the wrong groups. And deep down, we're like, man, that's not how I would want to be treated. It's weird that I'm treating somebody like this. That's what my ultimate hope is for you at the end of this class, that you just become more mindful of the ways in which you're labeling people. And, labeling, it is kind of, people like to use it as a sense of power. If I label this person, I feel better about myself. And that's not good. So we don't want to use labels as a way for us to feel like, powerful over someone else. Sometimes it's empowering to be able to say, hey, look, I choose this identity because that's who I am, versus projecting a label on someone else so that you feel superior. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's be mindful of that as we move forward. So some people will identify by label. So like with JP's video, he was trying to make the point of being an influencer. And sometimes we'll put the label on ourselves as influencer to make us feel better about ourselves. Sometimes we put certain labels on ourselves, and we'll talk about this later when we read about social self. We put it on as because to us it's like okay, I'll say cheerleader. I used to be a cheerleader in high school, and I would put the label, I'm a cheerleader, and I want to be that label because there's something to it, but there's also the bad part of the cheerleader snobby and ditzy and clicky. But for some reason I wanted the label because it felt like it was making me a part of. In reality, I wasn't really that much of the cheerleader type, even though I'd done it since I was in 4th grade. In high school, I was just kind of a little bit of a rebel. I wasn't really cheerleading as good as I probably could. So, but I wanted the label because I wanted to feel a part of. Because if I wasn't doing cheerleading, then I was like, well, then what am I? And that's just kind of how we live life. That's just how society is. So what we are. So, I accept that, and I see that for the reasons why I chose that label. Even though, there's the negative connotations that come with it, I was willing to accept that just to be accepted. So, anywho, some labels people choose to accept to feel a part of, and then sometimes we are given labels that we don't want. And the reason why we are given those is so others can either feel superior or identify, right? They want to, pick out the people and this happens a lot in high school because we're trying to figure shit out and we don't know ourselves and we're so afraid of not fitting in that we have to put labels on everyone. So then that can put us in a box too. So we're trying to avoid that and break away from the labels and trying to be beyond labels and being more identifying of who we are. And that's why we're doing what we're doing in this class, to figure out, who the fuck am I? We might not know yet. And it takes a while. It takes a while to figure that out. And even once you think you figured it out, you're like, maybe I don't want to be that identity anymore. I want to be something else. And we'll talk about that with Eddie Izzard at the very end of this week's lecture. So anyway, the biggest thing I hope that you learn from the things that we've just covered is understanding that we need to be respectful how others want to be addressed. It's that simple. Or try not to address people in a manner that's demeaning or labeling them in such a way where it's like, wow, that's you're just being a dick, right? So we don't want to be that person. Other things to be mindful of is sometimes we label ourselves like, oh, I'm OCD, or I'm, it's my anxiety. And some of us actually really do suffer from these ailments. And we'll talk about that with Plague of Ticks next, as David Sedaris kind of deals with. We make these jokes, or PTSD, I suffer from, we say these things, but the reality is some of these things are very detrimental to our experience. Like, I actually do suffer from crippling anxiety and working on it, doing things, whatever. But it would be inappropriate for me to say something like, oh, that's my OCD. I don't have that. I just like some things to be particular. So it's inappropriate for me to make that statement. Have I done that? Absolutely. We all do that. And that's what society does, is we start to take the power away of some of these things because that's just how we are as human beings. So anyway, be mindful if you're using those terms. We do not use the R word in this class. In the 90s, when I grew up, the R word, you saw that in the quiz, is a word that we used very often. Like, oh, that's retarded. Like, excuse my language. That was the word that we used. We don't use that in this class, okay? So be mindful. You should, I hope by the end of this class, some words that you may have used consistently, like when you use gay as a negative connotation, I hope that by the end of this class, if you go to use that, you feel a little nauseous because you used it inappropriately. So, we don't use gay as a negative connotation. We don't use the R word. And I cuss a lot and I joke around a lot, but I'm also trying to be incredibly mindful of the ways in which we have these conversations, because man, it's hurtful. And then it's gross. You know, let's just be honest. Like at this point, we've gotten to another level of humanity where it's like we just don't do that anymore. It's silly. So anyway, so just be mindful of our language in self-diagnosing and just saying things that, you know, when there's some people who, again, like you're going to read with David Sedaris, who suffer from that, and it is, you know, debilitating to some extent. It's hard to, you know, when I suffer, you know, I have really bad anxiety attacks, it's hard for me to exist in this world, and it sucks, and I get through it and I walk through it. But you know, if you know, if someone's saying, oh, you know, I'm just having anxiety, it's like, are you really? Do you know what that feels like, where you can't get out of bed? And you know what I mean? So anyway, let's be mindful of how we use those. If you catch me at any point in time and I do something and you want to question it, please do email me, message me, let me know, and I will absolutely correct myself. So that is what we are here for, to just be mindful. And I never take offense because I don't understand all the things. I don't see, you know, what I might say or do that might offend somebody. So, you know, I don't mind. Doesn't bother me any, you know. So anyway, vice versa, if ever you're seeing something that's sticking out that you're concerned about, feel free to reach out to me. I definitely don't mind. It just makes me feel more at ease, you know, when I know if I've done something that's inappropriate. So anyway, go ahead here and if you haven't already read A Plague of Ticks from David Sedaris, go ahead and read that little quick chapter. And also there's an Billie Eilish, just a quick little article on her experience with Tourette syndrome. So go ahead and take a look at those, and we're going to come back and have a little discussion.